A.R. rich, spoiled girl humiliated the waitress. What the Alpha King did next shocked everyone. The grand hall of the palace glimmered under the soft glow of hundreds of chandeliers. Golden banners swayed gently from the high ceilings, and the air smelled faintly of roses and incense. Tonight, the city's nobles had gathered for a lavish banquet, an event meant to showcase the wealth and power of the royal family. Laughter and music filled every corner, but in the midst of the celebration there were whispers, secrets and gossip hidden beneath polite smiles. At the center of the room, Lady Seraphine moved like a queen among lesser stars. Her gown shimmered with silk and gold thread, her hair perfectly arranged, her every gesture commanding attention. She was known across the city as spoiled, beautiful, and sharp-tongued.
Wherever she went, people either admired her or dreaded her. Tonight, she carried her usual arrogance like a crown.
Across the hall, a young waitress named Elara moved quietly among the tables. Her hands were steady, her smile gentle, and her eyes held a calmness that drew attention, even if only to a few observant nobles.
Elara had worked in the palace for years, always unnoticed, always polite. She had learned to glide through the grandeur without disrupting it, serving food and drink with perfect timing, never seeking praise.
Seraphine noticed her immediately, not because she admired Elara, but because she found her dull, ordinary, and beneath notice. A cruel idea sparked in her mind, and she approached the table where Elara was serving. "Wait!" Seraphine called, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. She stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This soup, is it meant for humans or for mice?" She giggled, her laughter sharp like glass. "Perhaps someone of your simple taste might not understand the difference."
Elara froze for a moment, setting down the tray carefully.
Her face remained calm, her hands steady.
"I'm sorry, my lady," she said softly.
"I prepared it as it was instructed. I can take it back and fix it if you like."
The hall erupted in quiet laughter.
Some nobles covered their mouths to hide amusement, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how the Alpha King would react. But Seraphina was not done. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so that only those at the table could hear. "No, dear. Don't trouble yourself. I simply enjoy watching someone struggle with tasks beyond their ability." But a quiet strength shone in her eyes. She didn't respond with anger or tears. Instead, she bowed her head slightly, her dignity intact. The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter, though most did not notice it yet. From his throne at the far end of the hall, Kale, the Alpha King, watched silently. He was a man whose presence could command obedience without a word. His cloak of deep blue velvet rippled slightly as he shifted in his seat. His gaze, cold and sharp, had already taken note of Seraphine's actions. He noticed Elara's reaction, too. There was something in her silence, in the way she held herself, that made him lean forward ever so slightly. Kale rarely intervened in the games of the nobles, but tonight something in him stirred, a sense that he must act, not out of anger, but because of the imbalance in the room. Seraphine's arrogance, unchecked, was beginning to disrupt the harmony of the evening. "Lady Seraphine." Kael's voice rang out suddenly, smooth and commanding, yet calm. It was enough to make the chatter in the hall fall into silence. All eyes turned toward the throne. "Step forward." Seraphine's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. She had expected whispers, perhaps some looks, but not this direct summons from the king himself. Breaths. Her heart thumped in her chest, and a faint flush rose to her cheeks. She walked forward, trying to maintain her usual air of superiority. Kale's gaze was intense, scanning her as if weighing her soul. "You find amusement in belittling those who serve," he said slowly.
Do you believe that power is shown through cruelty? Seraphine hesitated. Most would have knelt in fear.
But her pride was as strong as her beauty. It is only a joke, my lord, she replied, her voice steady, though slightly strained.
I meant no harm. Surely you can understand that amusement is harmless. Cale's eyes narrowed. Amusement? His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of authority that could shatter courage. To humiliate another is not amusement. It is weakness masked as entertainment. The hall was silent. Even the servants stopped moving, sensing the tension. Seraphine felt her stomach tighten. She was used to commanding attention, not facing it in judgment. Cale stood slowly, his presence suddenly filling the entire hall. The golden light seemed to bend around him, making his figure taller, more commanding than it had appeared moments before. "You will make amends," he said. Not to me, but to her. His gaze shifted to Alara. "You who have been wronged will be recognized. And you, Lady Seraphine, will learn humility under my supervision." Gasps filled the room. Some nobles whispered in shock. "Burrs." Seraphine's lips parted, but no words came out. She had never been instructed, let alone commanded, to apologize publicly or serve someone she considered beneath her. Alara, calm as ever, merely inclined her head slightly. She did not speak, but her eyes met Cale's, and there was a silent understanding, a shared strength, a quiet trust in the king's judgment. Seraphine's cheeks burned with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Pride, which had always been her shield, now felt like a weight she could not lift.
Mr. Braveboth. She wanted to retreat, to demand that Cale's command be revoked, but something in his presence held her in place. His eyes were like storms contained beneath calm waters, and in them she saw an authority that would not be denied.
"Your task begins tomorrow," Cale continued. "You will learn to serve not only with your hands, but with your heart. Only then will you understand the value of dignity, respect, and true strength."
Seraphine felt the hall spin around her. Serve?
Under the guidance of someone like Alara? She had never imagined such a thing in her life. Every instinct in her screamed against it. Yet Cale's command was absolute. She nodded stiffly, unwillingly, as the king's gaze bore into her. As she returned to her seat, the whispers grew louder. The nobles looked at her with a mix of amusement and curiosity. Some had never seen the usually untouchable Lady Seraphine in such a vulnerable position. Even the musicians faltered for a moment, unsure how to continue their performance in the tension that had settled over the hall. Brass. Cale returned to his throne, his eyes still fixed on Alara. He saw more than the quiet composure. He saw patience, resilience, and a grace that had not been forced but earned. In that moment he recognized a rare kind of strength, one that did not rely on wealth, status, or fear. Grasp. For Alara, the evening had changed in an instant. She had been unnoticed for so long, yet now the king himself had acknowledged her. She did not smile, nor did she celebrate. She simply continued her duties with the same steady hands and calm heart. But inside, a small spark of hope had been lit. Breath, however, could not ignore the turmoil inside her. Pride battled shame, envy battled curiosity, and for the first time she felt powerless in a way she had never known. The thought of serving Alara filled her with dread, but also an unexpected, uncomfortable fascination. As the banquet continued, the music and laughter seemed distant to Seraphine. She could only think of the task ahead and of the quiet girl who had not crumpled under her cruelty.
She did not yet understand the depth of what Cale had set in motion, for all three of them. Outside, the moon shone over the palace gardens, silver light spilling over stone pathways and flowering hedges.
The night air was cool, carrying the promise of change. Something was beginning. Something that would alter the lives of Seraphine, Elara, and Cale forever. But in the quiet of the hall, as the nobles whispered and the candles flickered, Cale's voice echoed in Seraphine's mind. "You will learn humility, or you will find yourself undone." The words hung like a storm cloud, heavy and unavoidable. Seraphine realized that tonight was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. And so, the stage was set. Pride would clash with compassion, arrogance with dignity, and in the shadows of the palace, hearts would begin to stir in ways none of them could yet imagine.
But who would rise? Who would fall? And who would claim the Alpha King's notice? The night had only just begun.
The morning sun streamed through the tall, arched windows of the palace, casting golden light across the marble floors. The grand hall that had been alive with laughter and music the night before was now quiet, almost reverent, as servants moved carefully, preparing for the day. Yet the air was heavy with anticipation, for the night's events had left the nobles in whispered excitement.
Lady Seraphine entered the hall, her gown less extravagant than usual, but still shimmering with silk.
Her face was pale, her expression carefully composed, though inside her chest felt tight with unease. Today she would begin the task the Alpha King had set for her. To serve the palace, not as a guest, not as a noble, but under the guidance of Elara, the quiet waitress she had mocked. Elara was already present, arranging the breakfast trays with her usual calm efficiency. When she saw Seraphine, she paused briefly but did not look away with anger or resentment. Instead, she offered a slight nod, acknowledging her presence without judgment. Seraphine's first instinct was to scoff, to say something sharp that would remind Elara of her lowly place. But something in the girl's quiet dignity froze the words in her mouth. She was, for the first time, aware of her own arrogance.
"Good morning, Elara," said softly, her voice steady and clear. "I'll show you where to begin."
Follow me!
Seraphine followed reluctantly, her heels clicking against the marble. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the palace itself were aware of her pride and intended to weigh it down.
Elara led her through the kitchens, past the bustling staff, to a small work area near the servants' quarters.
Seraphine had never stepped here before. The air smelled of fresh bread, herbs, and the faint scent of wax from polishing. This was a world she had always ignored, one she had considered beneath her.
"First, you must learn the basics," Elara said.
Carrying trays, serving politely, observing the needs of the guests.
"It is not as simple as it looks."
Seraphine huffed silently, feeling insulted by the instruction. Yet she followed the instructions, balancing a tray with awkward hands. Her first attempt was shaky. A cup of tea teetered dangerously before she steadied it. Elara watched patiently, offering tips with quiet encouragement. Keep your back straight. Watch your steps. Speak clearly. Confidence is not in beauty. It is in presence. Seraphine frowned. Presence, she echoed, unsure she understood.
"Yes," Elara said gently. "Even in serving, one must be aware."
Not just of the task, but of the heart of the one you serve. Seraphine rolled her eyes slightly, thinking the advice overly poetic. But as the morning continued, She began to notice things she had never considered, how Alara anticipated the needs of the guests, how she moved gracefully without drawing attention to herself, and how the nobles, though unaware, were subtly guided by her skill and composure. By noon, Seraphine's arms were tired from carrying trays and her back ached from standing straight for hours. But more than physical exhaustion, she felt something unfamiliar, a sense of humility creeping into her chest. She had mocked this girl, belittled her, and yet here she was, showing her strength without arrogance. Keo watched from the balcony above the hall, his presence unseen but palpable. He observed Seraphine's every movement, noting the flicker of frustration, the stubborn pride, and the beginnings of genuine effort. His lips curved ever so slightly in approval. Not because she was perfect, but because she had begun to learn. Lunch brought a new challenge.
Nobles arrived unexpectedly, demanding delicacies, each with precise and sometimes absurd instructions. Seraphine had to adapt, remembering Ilara's lessons, while keeping her composure in front of the powerful and critical guests.
One noble, a man known for his arrogance, sneered at her attempts. "Careful, girl.
Don't spill anything. We wouldn't want your clumsiness to ruin the meal."
Seraphine's face burned, and for a moment her old pride wanted to rise to strike back with sharp words, but she remembered Ilara's calm demeanor, her patience, and the Alpha King's watchful eyes. Swallowing her pride, she completed the task with careful precision, placing each dish perfectly before the nobles. A murmur ran through the guests. Breath. Some were impressed, others skeptical. But Kale's eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. Seraphine was beginning to understand, not just the mechanics of service, but the discipline, the awareness, and the humility it required. As the afternoon sun dipped toward the west, Kale finally descended from the balcony, his presence commanding immediate attention. Even the nobles fell silent in respect. He walked slowly toward the work area where Seraphine and Ilara stood, observing without interference.
"You are improving," Kale said, his voice calm but full of authority.
But this is only the beginning. True strength is not shown in skill alone.
It is shown in restraint, patience, and respect. Seraphine bowed her head slightly, unsure whether to feel proud or embarrassed.
She had never been praised for such efforts before. Her world had always been one of instant gratification, where wealth and beauty demanded obedience.
This was different. Ilara, standing beside her, did not speak, but her eyes met Seraphine's for a brief moment, and in that silent exchange Seraphine felt something stir inside her. Not guilt, exactly, but a strange recognition of her own failings. The evening brought a challenge that would test Seraphine further. A group of nobles arrived for tea, and one of the younger members, known for teasing servants, deliberately knocked over a cup, spilling it across the polished floor. Seraphine instinctively moved to scold him, but Ilara stopped her with a gentle touch.
"Observe first,"
Ilara whispered. "Then act. Pride is not correction, it is reaction." Seraphine froze, her chest tightening. Pride had always been her armor, but she realized it could now be her undoing. She watched the situation calmly, then carefully cleaned the spill, offering assistance to the noble with a polite smile. The boy looked surprised, but left without comment. Kale, who had been watching discreetly, allowed himself a faint nod. He could see the growth, however small, and it pleased him. But he also knew the test had only begun. Lessons of the heart were far more difficult than lessons of skill. Later that night, the palace gardens offered a quiet refuge. Ilara and Seraphine walked among the hedges and fountains, the moonlight reflecting on the gentle ripples of the water. Seraphine felt tired, physically and emotionally, and for the first time she spoke honestly.
I never realized, she admitted, her voice low, almost ashamed. I thought serving was easy. I thought it meant nothing.
Elara looked at her calmly. It is not the act alone, Lady Seraphine.
It is what the act teaches you. Compassion, awareness, respect. These are the lessons many of the wealthy never learn. Seraphine swallowed, the words settling heavily in her chest. She had mocked, laughed, and humiliated, and now she was learning from the very person she had belittled. For the first time she felt something unfamiliar. Humility. The night deepened, and the palace seemed to hold its breath, rancing. Somewhere in the shadowed corners, whispers of change began to stir. The nobles who had laughed at her earlier could not see the shift, but Kale did. And more importantly, Elara did. Kale's presence was always felt, even when unseen. He appeared quietly in the garden, stepping from the shadows with the grace of a predator, yet calm and unthreatening. His eyes, sharp and knowing, met Seraphine's with an intensity that made her heart race. "You have begun to understand," he said softly. Yet the words carried authority. But understanding is not enough. Actions, decisions, and choices will test you further. Tomorrow you will face a challenge that cannot be solved with skill alone. Breaths. Seraphine's stomach tightened. The thought of another trial, especially under Kale's watchful gaze, both terrified and intrigued her. She realized the journey had only just begun. Elara stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Seraphine's arm.
You will not be alone. Learn, observe, and grow.
That is all that is asked. Seraphine looked at her, seeing not just a servant but someone strong, wise, and patient. A flicker of admiration, and perhaps something more complex, rose in her chest. But pride still lingered, a stubborn shadow she had yet to fully overcome. Kale's gaze lingered on both of them, as if he could see not only their present but the paths their hearts would take. "The night holds many secrets," he said quietly, "and the dawn brings revelations." The moonlight shimmered on the palace fountains, and the night air was cool with the promise of change. Seraphine felt it in her chest, a stirring she could not name. Something was shifting, not just her understanding, but the currents of power, respect, and perhaps inspiration. As the night deepened, a distant sound echoed through the gardens, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried by the wind. Neither Seraphine nor Elara could make it out, but both felt a chill, a warning, as if the palace itself were speaking. Seraphine shivered, unsure whether from fear or anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she could not yet imagine how far her pride would be tested. But one truth was clear. The Alpha King's eyes were upon her, and the quiet strength of Elara had begun to change her in ways she could not yet understand. The night ended with a final silent tension, the kind that promises storms, trials, and transformations. And in that quiet, unseen by any, Kale's lips curved in a small, approving smile. The palace was quiet in the early morning, bathed in a soft silver light from the rising sun. Birds chirped outside the tall windows, and the scent of blooming jasmine drifted through the corridors. Yet inside, a tension lingered, invisible but palpable. Lady Seraphine walked through the halls, her steps slower now, less assured than before. She had served with Elara for several days, carrying trays, polishing silver, and attending to the needs of nobles and staff alike. Each task, once humiliating, now carried a weight she did not fully understand. She paused outside the main banquet hall, her reflection flickering in the polished marble walls. Pride had been her shield, but now it felt fragile, easily pierced by every glance from the Alpha King, Kale. She had never admitted weakness, not to anyone. And yet, under his gaze, she felt exposed, forced to confront the parts of herself she had long ignored. "Elara," she called softly, her voice hesitant. I need your guidance again. Alara turned, holding a tray with delicate pastries. Her expression was calm, almost serene.
Of course, she said.
But where do you feel unsure?
Seraphine hesitated. It was difficult to admit uncertainty to someone she had once humiliated.
Her throat felt tight, and a flicker of shame rose to her cheeks. It's the guests, their requests. I worry I will fail again.
Elara placed the tray down on a nearby table. You will not fail if you observe, listen, and act with care.
Fear is natural, but it should not control you. Strength is quiet, not loud.
Seraphine nodded, trying to absorb the words. There was a rhythm in Elara's movements, a flow that Seraphine struggled to match.
It was not just skill, it was grace, patience, and wisdom wrapped in quiet confidence. And somehow, she felt drawn to it, almost envious of the serenity Elara carried so effortlessly. Today will be different, Elara added. You will see that service is not only about tasks, but also about choices. Seraphine followed her through the hallways toward a wing of the palace she had rarely entered. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries, depicting battles, kings, and queens from centuries past. It felt like stepping into a history she had never known, a past she had ignored in her pursuit of luxury and status. As they approached a quiet corridor, Seraphine overheard voices, whispers that carried more weight than casual conversation. Curious, she edged closer, careful to remain unseen. The voices were low but urgent, filled with malice.
The king cannot be allowed to continue, one voice hissed. His favoritism of the servants is dangerous.
If we strike now, the nobles will support us. He cannot see the girl, the waitress.
Elara standing by his side. But the timing must be perfect, another voice replied. Perhaps, during the feast when he is distracted, we can expose him, humiliate him, and take power for ourselves. Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of noble scheming, but she never imagined the danger could reach the king so directly, or that it involved Elara. Panic and fear collided inside her chest. For the first time, she realized that this girl she had mocked was not just resilient, she was valuable, and perhaps irreplaceable. Elara must know, Seraphine muttered to herself, her voice trembling. She had never felt such urgency before. Perhaps her pride battled with the instinct to act, but the fear of harm outweighed every hesitation. Elara, she said quietly as they reached the kitchen, we need to speak. Something is happening. Something dangerous. Elara's eyes widened slightly, but she remained composed. What is it? She asked. Seraphine explained what she had overheard, her voice low, almost shaking. Elara listened carefully, nodding as the details sank in.
You did well to hear this, she said finally.
But acting carefully is more important than acting quickly. The king must be warned discreetly. The palace corridors suddenly seemed narrower, shadows longer, as if the walls themselves were watching. Seraphine felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her breaths. She had never been entrusted with secrets or danger. But now she realized she could not retreat into arrogance. Right. She had to act. Let's go to him, Seraphine whispered, before it's too late. The Alpha King was in the private council room reviewing reports. He looked up as they entered, his expression calm but alert. Wrath, sharp as a hawk, scanned Seraphine first, noting the urgency in her posture. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady but commanding. Seraphine took a deep breath.
There is a plot against you, my lord.
Some nobles plan to humiliate you during the feast tonight. I overheard them.
Elara, she is involved somehow. They fear her presence. Kale's gaze shifted to Elara, who had remained silent, observing the king carefully. A faint smile touched his lips, almost imperceptible.
I see,
He said. Bite. And you bring this to me, despite your fear? Seraphine nodded. Yes, I could not stand by. I realize now how important she is, and how wrong I was to humiliate her. Kale studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and tense. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging not just the warning, but the growth within her. You have shown wisdom today, Lady Seraphine. This is a step toward understanding that strength is not measured in pride, but in action and awareness.
Seraphine felt a strange warmth rise in her chest.
For the first time, she realized that Kale's attention was not merely judgmental, it was measured, even thoughtful. She had seen him as cold, untouchable, but now she sensed the depth of his watchfulness, and perhaps his care. Elara, Kyle continued, his gaze softening slightly, you have demonstrated patience, courage, and clarity. Your quiet strength shields those around you. This is why you are needed, not mocked. Elara inclined her head but said nothing, her calm presence as strong as ever. Seraphine felt a pang of admiration mixed with guilt for her past cruelty. The king's next words, however, made her heart skip a beat. Tonight, the nobles will test loyalty, courage, and wisdom. You, both of you, will play a crucial role. The outcome may shape not just the palace, but the future of the kingdom. The afternoon passed with a tense rhythm. Seraphine worked alongside Elara, following her guidance carefully. Every tray carried, every plate polished, every guest attended to became a test of skill, patience, and awareness. Seraphine began to notice subtle cues, the shift in a noble's tone, the unspoken glance, the tension in a hand that might betray fear or malice. Elara's lessons were no longer abstract, they were survival. As evening fell, the banquet hall filled once more, this time with an air of anticipation rather than celebration. Candles flickered on tall silver stands, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Guests murmured among themselves, unaware that tonight would not be ordinary. Kale sat at his throne, calm and composed, his gaze scanning the room. He noticed Seraphine's nervousness, tempered now by a careful awareness that had begun to replace her former arrogance. He also noted Elara's serene presence, unshaken, prepared, and quietly commanding attention in ways the nobles did not yet understand. The moment came when the conspirators made their move. A young noble, bold and arrogant, approached with a smug smile, carrying a goblet of wine. The hall seemed to hold its breath. The noble intended to tip the goblet toward Kale, creating a scene, exposing him as vulnerable. Seraphine's heart pounded. She remembered Elara's words. Observe, act with care, and choose wisely. Without thinking, she moved subtly, shifting the goblet with a careful hand so it spilled harmlessly onto the table's edge. The noble froze, unsure what had happened, and the guests murmured in confusion. Kale's eyes sharpened, a faint flash of amusement appearing in the depths of his gaze. He rose slowly, his presence immediately commanding respect and silence. "Enough," he said, his voice smooth, steady, and absolute. The young noble stepped back, caught in the gravity of the king's authority. Desperate exchanged a brief, meaningful glance. In that moment, Seraphine felt something new. Trust, understanding, and an unexpected sense of pride, tempered by humility. Breaths. She had acted not out of fear or arrogance, but with awareness, courage, and care. After the immediate danger passed, Kale approached them, You have both proven your value tonight, he said quietly, yet every word carried weight. Strength is measured not by wealth, status, or power alone, but by courage, awareness, and the choices we make when tested. Seraphine bowed deeply, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something more she could not name filling her chest.
For the first time, she understood what Kale had intended, not punishment, but transformation.
And she began to feel a strange, unexpected admiration for both Elara and the king, emotions that confused and unsettled her. The nobles, oblivious to the true danger they had narrowly avoided, continued their whispers. Some were impressed, others frightened, but all sensed a change in the dynamics of the hall. The Alpha King's control was absolute, yet tempered by wisdom and foresight. And the two young women, one humble, one formerly arrogant, had become unexpectedly vital to the balance of the palace. As the night deepened, the three of them stood together, silent for a moment, watching the flickering candlelight reflect on polished surfaces. Seraphine realized that the path ahead would be difficult. Pride, envy, and fear would continue to challenge her. But she also felt a spark of determination she had never known, a desire to rise above her former self, guided by lessons she had only just begun to understand.
Outside, a breeze rustled the leaves at the palace gardens.
The wind seemed to carry a quiet warning, a whisper of trials yet to come. Seraphine knew that this night was only the beginning, that the challenges ahead would test not just skill, but heart, courage, and loyalty. And Kale's eyes, sharp and unyielding, held a promise of more lessons, more challenges, and perhaps a deeper understanding of the bonds between them all. The dawn broke over the palace like liquid gold, spilling light across the towers and gardens. The city below stirred to life, unaware of the events that had unfolded within the walls. But inside the palace, tension still lingered. The threat from the nobles had been revealed, yet whispers of plots and schemes continued to drift through the corridors like shadows. Lady Seraphine awoke earlier than usual, her mind restless. She had spent the night thinking about the banquet, the conspiracies, and her own actions. For the first time, she truly understood humility, not just as a lesson, but as a path that could change her. Pride, once her shield, now felt fragile. Yet she did not feel defeated. She felt determined. "Elara!" Seraphine said softly as they met in the servants' corridor. "I want to help!" "Not because the king commands it, but because I want to do what is right." Elara's eyes softened. "Your intentions are genuine," she said quietly. "And that is the first step toward true growth. But actions matter more than words. Today will test both of us, and the Alpha King. Are you ready?" Seraphine nodded, feeling a flutter of nervousness and anticipation. Today, she would face not only the scheming nobles but also the depths of her own courage. The morning passed with careful preparation. Tables were polished, trays arranged, and servants briefed on their duties. Yet beneath the ordinary tasks, an undercurrent of urgency hummed. The conspirators had not given up, and Kale, the Alpha King, had instructed both women to remain alert. Kale entered the main hall quietly, his presence commanding attention even without a word. His dark eyes scanned the room, noting every movement, every glance, and every hidden intention. For once, Seraphine did not shrink under his gaze. Instead, she felt a spark of courage. But she had learned from Elara, and she would act with awareness, patience, and determination. "Today," Kael began, his voice calm but firm, "the true measure of strength will be revealed. Courage, loyalty, and wisdom will decide the fate of this hall, and perhaps the kingdom itself. Remain vigilant." Seraphine's heart raced. She knew the danger was near, yet she also knew she could act wisely if she stayed focused. Elara moved beside her, serene and composed, a silent reminder of strength tempered by patience. Together, they would face whatever came next.
The conspirators made their move during the luncheon. A group of nobles approached, their smiles polite but their eyes sharp with hidden malice.
Their plan was simple: embarrass the king, discredit Ilara, and seize influence over the palace. But Seraphine had overheard their plot and had spent the morning preparing for this moment. The nobles began subtly, sending false reports and whispering lies to other guests. They tried to provoke anger and doubt, hoping Kale would react in frustration. "Great," Seraphine observed quietly, noting each movement, each word, and each intention. She realized that knowledge and awareness were as powerful as swords in this battle of wits. Elara moved gracefully among the tables, attending to nobles, offering help, and quietly correcting minor mistakes. Her calm presence diffused tension before it could escalate. Seraphine followed her example, assisting guests with precision and care, ensuring that every detail was perfect. Together they created an invisible shield around the Alpha King, protecting him from deceit and humiliation. Great Kale, watching from his throne, allowed them to act independently, testing both women's courage and judgment. His eyes lingered on Seraphine longer than before, noting her growth. She had moved from arrogance to humility, from pride to awareness, and her actions now reflected strength rather than vanity. The conspirators grew impatient. One noble, frustrated by the women's careful handling, attempted a bold move.
He deliberately spilled a glass of wine near the king, hoping to provoke an angry reaction.
Bah! Seraphine's heart skipped a beat. She remembered Alara's teachings: observe first, then act with care. She moved quickly, placing a small tray to catch the spill before it could reach Kale.
The noble froze, astonished. Seraphine's eyes met Kale's for a brief moment, and she felt a subtle acknowledgement of her skill and courage. Kale rose from his throne, his presence instantly commanding silence.
"Enough," he said, his voice calm but heavy with authority. The hall fell still, every guest sensing the weight of his words. "Breaths, those who plot against this kingdom will find no mercy. Loyalty, courage, and integrity are not optional. They are required." The conspirators lowered their heads, realizing their failure.
Kale's control over the palace was absolute, yet tempered by wisdom and fairness. Seraphine felt a surge of pride tempered by humility.
She had played a role in protecting the king and the palace, and it was a feeling unlike anything she had ever known.
Elara stood beside her, her calm presence a steady anchor.
For Seraphine, the contrast was striking. Once she had mocked this girl, seeing only her lowly status, and now she admired her courage, grace, and wisdom. A quiet respect had grown, replacing the arrogance and envy that had once ruled her heart. After the immediate danger passed, Kale approached the two women. "You have both proven your worth," he said quietly, yet every word carried significance. "Strength is not measured by wealth, beauty, or title, rationed by courage, wisdom, and the choices we make when faced with adversity."
Seraphine bowed, her chest swelling with a mixture of relief, pride, and humility.
For the first time, she felt truly seen, not for her beauty or status, but for her actions, her courage, and her willingness to grow. Elara inclined her head, her expression calm yet satisfied. "You have learned well, Lady Seraphine," she said softly. "And that is the first step toward lasting change." Kale's gaze lingered on both women. He saw more than courage. He saw loyalty, wisdom, and the beginnings of trust. His own heart, usually guarded and reserved, stirred with a new awareness. Alara's quiet strength had always drawn him, but Seraphine's growth and courage added a new dimension, a reminder that redemption and transformation were possible for those willing to embrace them. The nobles, now subdued and cautious, continued their meal in silence. The palace had endured the test, yet everyone sensed that something had shifted. The Alpha King's authority was reinforced, yet it was no longer solely fear that held the palace together. It was respect, trust, and the quiet strength of those who stood by him. As the day wore on, Seraphine reflected on her journey. She had arrived at the palace proud, arrogant, and careless. She had humiliated Elara and sought attention through cruelty. But now, after trials, observation, and careful guidance, she understood the value of humility, courage, and integrity. Her heart had changed, and with it her understanding of strength, power, and compassion. Elara, for her part, had remained steadfast. Bration had guided, observed, and supported Seraphine, yet had never sought recognition. Her quiet strength had become a beacon, not just for the king, but for the once spoiled noble who had learned to respect her.
Kale, standing on the balcony overlooking the city as the sun began to set, felt a rare sense of peace. The palace was secure, the conspirators subdued, and the two young women who had played crucial roles had proven their worth. But more than that, he saw potential. Potential for loyalty, courage, and even connection that went beyond duty. Later, in the quiet of the evening, Kale summoned Seraphine and Elara to the balcony. The city stretched below them, bathed in the warm glow of sunset. The breeze carried the scent of jasmine and fresh stone, and for a moment the palace seemed suspended between past and future, between fear and hope. "You have both grown today," Kale said quietly, his gaze sweeping from one to the other. "Elara, your quiet strength protects and guides. Psh. Seraphine, your courage and willingness to change show true character. Together you embody what this palace and this kingdom needs." Seraphine lowered her eyes, feeling a mixture of pride, humility, and gratitude. For the first time she understood that true power was not in wealth, beauty, or status. It was in courage, wisdom, and the choices one made when faced with challenges. Elara's eyes met Seraphine's, and in that quiet glance Seraphine felt a warmth she had never experienced before. Respect, trust, and perhaps something more. A bond formed not through privilege but through shared trials and mutual understanding. Kale placed a hand on Elara's shoulder, a gesture of recognition and protection. He then looked at Seraphine, his expression unreadable, yet thoughtful. "Redemption is not simple," he said. "It is earned through courage, awareness, and loyalty. Today, both of you have proven that such change is possible." The three of them stood in silence, watching the city below. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the palace. The events of the past days had transformed them all. Pride had been tempered, courage tested, and hearts open to understanding and growth. Seraphine felt a new determination rise within her. She would continue to grow, to learn, and to act with care and awareness. She had been humbled, yes, but not broken. And in that humility she had found a new kind of strength, one that could guide her through any challenge to come. Elara, steadfast as ever, felt a quiet satisfaction. Guidance and courage had not only protected the king and the palace, but had also transformed someone who had once scorned her. She had shown that strength could exist quietly, without need for recognition, and that true influence came from wisdom, care, and courage. Kale's heart, usually guarded, softened as he looked at both women.
He had witnessed bravery, growth, and loyalty beyond what he had expected.
And in that he saw hope, not just for the palace but for the future, and perhaps for connections that could transcend the walls of duty and authority. The night fell, quiet and serene. Stars began to sparkle above the palace, and the city below shimmered like a sea of lights. The palace had endured trials, survived danger, and emerged stronger. And within its walls, 3 hearts had been transformed. By courage, humility, and trust.